I always like to get a photo of everybody so that my boss knows I was actually here doing something versus just out like sampling the local craft beer scene. So if you don't mind.
Yes.
Hey. Okay. So now.
Hey, come on. Smile, hey. It's not audio?
Well, this is rather primitive technology. It's just a cell phone. Okay. So let's code, because everything works perfectly on live coding, right? Yeah, we'll go with that. Okay. So can everybody hear me in the back? Because I can't hold the mic and type. So this is a Spring initializer, sometimes referred to by its URL as start.spring.io. This is where your starting point for microservice goodness, Spring-based microservice goodness starts. You can go to the start.spring.io from the Spring command line interface or from curl. I like to go to the website because it's so pretty. Okay, so I like it. Anyway, but this is an opinionated start to Spring Boot-based applications. Pivotal is big on the term opinionated, which always used to drive me a little crazy until I figured out what it meant. So what is opinionated? Is anybody here an old-time framework developer, old Java framework developer, or even non-Java? In the old days of frameworks, there was literally one way to do pretty much everything, and that was the framework way. And if you tried to do it differently, you were in for a bruising. And the opinionated approach basically is sort of encapsulated like this. This sort of quoting mark. If you fall within the 80 to 90% use case, where everybody kind of falls on most uses, we make it absolutely dead simple for you to get your job done. If you fall in that other 10 to 20% fringe case, we still want to allow you to get your work done. It just may take a couple extra lines of code, but you can still get there from here. That's opinionated, right? It helps you get there very easily if you fall in that mainstream course, but it doesn't obstruct you if you don't. So the Spring initializer is also an opinionated tool. It gives you a way to get started very quickly and gives you some sensible defaults. As you can see, there's not a lot on the screen. You can expand it to the full version, you can see a whole lot more. So you can see there are a lot of options here you can choose from, but you don't have to. So what does the Spring initializer do for you? It again takes sensible defaults and bundles up a few things for you to get started with a project. So I guess let me back up just a little bit more. What does Spring Boot do for you? Spring Boot gives you the full capabilities of the Spring framework, which is an enterprise-grade Java framework. Again, all open source, opinionated. But Spring Boot gives you a way to consume that very easily as a developer. It simplifies your dependency management. It allows you to bundle things up into a fat jar, an Uber jar. So it allows you to bundle your dependencies and bring them in one place to encapsulate them and not leave those dependencies out of your control, where a sysadmin can upgrade your Tomcat installation over a weekend and kill your apps. Because everybody knows that the users don't know and don't care what happened to your app. They just know it broke. So it's your fault. Is anybody here familiar with 12-factor apps? 12-factor manifesto? Again, another manifesto. There are several factors in there, 12 to be precise, that are very important for what I call making your application a good cloud-native citizen. They're kind of the first among peers, I think, are 2 or 3. One of those is to bring your dependencies, bundle your dependencies. And the fat jar gives you a way to do that. That's why we always recommend a fat jar versus a WAR file, for instance. It allows you to internalize those dependencies and maintain control over them as a developer and not have things externally that can break as well. So you have that option to choose jar or WAR. We, again, prefer and recommend jar. You can choose your Java version, although with Spring Boot 2.0, Spring Framework 5, we are baselining it Java 8. Fully compliant with Java 9, but Java 8 is now the baseline. Spring Framework 4.3 and Boot version 1.5.8 and before, you could go down to Java 6. I don't know why you would want to, but you could. We supported that even long after Oracle stopped, so that's kind of nice. But again, opinionated. Another thing that Spring Boot does for you is if you choose from the list of battle-tested dependencies, which are version synchronized, by the way. So if you choose version 1.5.8 of Boot, and you choose to bring in WebSocket or Jersey, These are version synchronized, so you don't have to specify the version and keep that in sync manually. These are tested with version 158 of boot, the versions of these libraries that are included automatically by default. Can you override them? You bet. Can you bring your own dependency that's not on here? Absolutely. But you don't have to worry about it if it's on the list, which is kind of nice. Because as any senior developer will tell you, it is absolutely zero fun to play dependency whack-a-mole. And if you don't know what that is, you will someday. You will. I like to go with the simple version because it's simple. So we'll start there. But again, it gives you options. This doesn't generate your code for you. It actually creates a main method in your main application class. But the rest, it goes back to your dependency management and bundles where it zips it up, sends it down to you. You can start in with your code and kind of launch out quickly. So if you are a Maven developer, you can generate a Maven project. If you're a hipster, you can generate a Gradle project. It's entirely up to you. It's all fine. We support both. If you want to develop in Java or Groovy or Kotlin, you can. Any Kotlin fans in here? Kotlin's an awesome language. I actually, everything that I show you code-wise today, I have idiomatic Kotlin versions of out in a repo, which I'll show you the repo link at the end if Paul will remind me to put up on the screen. And it's a lot of fun. It's incredibly frustrating to go back and forth because I find that my semicolons don't come with me. And that's the least of your worries, but that's the thing that always trips me up the worst. But it's really a super, super language. I call it Java++ because that's, if you look at the features within Kotlin, it's kind of a proving ground, and Brian Getz and others within Oracle are looking at that going, hey, that's a nice feature. We should implement that. Hey, that's nice. We should probably incorporate that. And you're going to see more and more things like data classes and things like that creep into Java. You're already seeing it. We'll stay with Java tonight, but again, Kotlin's out there if you want to poke through the code. And I'm going to go with Spring Boot 2.0, milestone 6. This gets us the reactive bits, so we can start playing with them now. They're not GA yet, but Spring Boot 2 will be generally available, full production version, sometime in December, so we're really not far off. But you can start playing with it now. And again, all this is open source, so you can play with the bits. You can download the source code and build it yourself if you want. Go crazy, it's all good. But just for starters for tonight, we're going to create a project, a couple projects, and just start working through the code, and you can see how everything kind of comes together. I didn't mention earlier that Spring Framework 5 it has three basic elements that kind of everything falls under them as an umbrella. One is it's rebaselining at Java 8, which is good because then we get the full power of lambdas and streams and all that as a foundational feature. The other is full support of Kotlin, first class support of Kotlin throughout the framework, which is pretty slick. Let's see, and what's the other one? I don't remember. So those are the two big ones. Oh, reactive, of course. That's the third big one. That's why we're here tonight, right? So that's the other big story. Because again, it gives you more tools at your disposal to do more with less. So my colleague, Josh Long, anybody familiar with Josh? Starbucks man on Twitter? He's my teammate. And we sat down several months ago and said, how can we best showcase this reactive capability that we're going to be showing, that we want to show? And you know, you see certain apps like pet stores. I mean, they're just done to death, right? In the Java, enterprise Java space. And you see other things like, you know, chat apps and chess apps and all that. And that's great. But we wanted something that nobody had ever done before. So we thought, what can we do that has never been seen? And we thought, you know, wouldn't it be cool if we could stream movies across the internet? Granted, it's never been done before, and I know that, but we thought it would be cool if we could pull it off. So, you know, sometimes movies are called flicks, right? And the internet is sometimes referred to just shorthand as the net. So we thought we'd call it Netflix. And we did until we got the cease and desist letter. So we decided that we should probably rename it and not run afoul of all the lawyers. But we had this really cool thing because, again, we have monos and fluxes, right? So we should be able to work this. We don't care about all the movies. We just care about the reactive theme movies, or the movies that have to do with like lambdas and streams and futures and fluxes and monos and anything like that. So that's all we really care about. I mean, they can have all that other stuff. So we thought we'd come up with something called the FluxFlix service. And that has so far kept us out of the courts. So that's good. I'm going to bring in some dependencies. And again, this is all synchronized, version synchronized on what's exposed based on the version of boot you choose. In this case, version 2. So I'm going to bring in the Reactive Web dependency, which allows me to create a Reactive Web API. Any Spring MVC developers here existing? So you're used to deploying on Tomcat, probably. I mean, Spring MVC doesn't require that. I mean, Undertow and Netty and Jetty and what have you, you know. But with Spring Webflux, Netty is the default engine. Any Servlet 3.1 container will work. So if you have like Tomcat 8, and I guess Undertow is supporting it. But Netty has been the first mover. Netty is well established in this space, so that's kind of our default engine that we're going with. So that gets us Netty and Spring Webflux just out of the gate. I'm also going to bring in Reactive Mongodb. It makes very little sense to do a reactive application and sit on top of a database with blocking drivers, because all you're doing is adding potential complexity, and you're still waiting for that data store to say, I'm done. Okay, here's your data. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that unless you can go reactive all the way down. That's why we don't have Reactive JPA or Reactive JDBC yet. Oracle has talked about this in the last 2 Java 1s straight, saying, hey, you know, asynchronous JDBC would be a good thing. They even threw some code out about a month ago and said, hey, look, we're working on this. And then when we looked at the code, it had Java 9's Java util concurrent flow, and we said, hey, what's this? It looks like it's not fully baked. And they said, oh, that's not supposed to be in there, never mind. So we don't know. We don't know if it'll ever happen, but at some point, maybe it will. And if at that point it does happen, we'll fully support that as well. But the idea is that you go fully non-blocking all the way down to the metal, right? That's where you get your values. Every interaction needs to be non-blocking to get the full power of it. Right now, Spring Data version K, it's all alphabetical, so it's K, supports MongoDB, Cassandra, Couchbase, Redis, with more coming online probably about every week or month. But those are the engines right now that have asynchronous reactive drivers that allow you to fully capitalize on that. I'm going to use Mongo because Mongo is the first ones out of the gate. They're a great data store. They're fully reactive, drivers available. And I like to call Mongo the dev null of databases. Very fast, very fast. And sometimes it actually even stores your data. So that's good. I'm going to use Lombok because I'm a lazy developer. I think it actually allows you to, well, I know it actually allows you to reduce your boilerplate and get down to business a lot faster. So I'm going to bring that in. I'm also going to bring in some other dependencies for security later on, but I'll have to manually add those. So that should be enough to get us going. And I'll just drop those out here. Let's see. So there we go. I'm going to open that and open it in my favorite IDE, which is IntelliJ. Spring works well with NetBeans. It works well with Eclipse. We even have an Eclipse build called Spring Tool Suite, which actually is kind of sweet because it has, no pun intended, because it actually allows you very easily to deploy to cloud environments. So that's kind of cool. But I'm an IntelliJ guy by and large, so that's kind of what I'm doing tonight. But we also work with Vim. The only thing we don't work with in any way, shape, or form is Emacs. Ever. Don't ever use Emacs. I always tell Josh that every time he starts up Emacs, a puppy dies. So don't do that. Puppies are nice. Puppies are awesome. Yes, VI. That's awesome. I just tweeted something earlier today. So I'd run across that there's a Vim extension that makes it into an IDE. Can you imagine? It's 2017 and people are still using Vim as an IDE. I don't know. Anyway, I like it. So let's start off with our FluxFlux application. So how do you start an application? Well, typically you look at your domain classes, right? So I'm going to, since this is a FluxFlux application, we're talking about movies, I'm going to create a class called movie. Kind of makes sense. I'm going to create some member variables, so like an ID for my movies, and then a title. I should mention too, by the way, I appreciate you sitting in the front row because sometimes I get typing kind of fast and my fingers go faster than my brain, and it doesn't help my cause that I'm narrating at the same time. So if you see a typo creep in, stop me before I hit build. Because if I hit build, it's on you, okay? All right, so here's our movie class. I'm going to annotate this as a document. So Spring Data knows, yep, save this in Mongo. I'm going to annotate this with that data so Lombok knows what to do with it. I'm also going to have Lombok create a no args constructor for me, and actually a required args constructor. I'm going to annotate my ID field as an ID field, and then I'm going to annotate this as a non-null, my title. This is between that and my required args constructor for Lombok. Lombok knows to create a single parameter constructor for me with title. So it's very neat, very tidy, and we're done with that. I also feel like it's kind of important to capture some operational data, because when we're streaming movies, it would be really cool to know if a particular movie is streamed 100 times a second, or maybe 1 time a year. Because if something is high demand, we want to add more movies like that to our catalog. If something is only streamed once a year, we probably don't want to renew that. So that's good information to have. So I'm going to create a movie event class, and we'll want to track, let's say, our movie ID in question. And then let's see, we'll call it date viewed, right? And let's see, this will also, we'll annotate this as a Lombok, let's see, all args, no, actually no args constructor, and an all args constructor, and that gets us our movie event. I'm also going to create a repository. Spring Data has the concept of repositories simply by creating an interface. We'll call this movie repository and extending a built-in interface in Spring Data. So I'm going to extend the reactive cred repository, and I'm going to store object type movie with IDs of type string, and that is enough. Spring Boot, when it sees that you've extended an interface in Spring Data and that you have a database driver in your class path, says, hey, you must want to interact with your data store. So let me provide your repository proxy for that, and that's what you get here. So that's enough to get us rolling, except we don't have any data yet. And I'm kind of a visual person, so I like to see what's happening. So what I'm going to do is just create a bean, which implements the command line runner interface. Command line runner interface is an interface to Spring Boot, which is a functional interface with a single abstract method. What can you do with a single abstract method in a functional interface? You can replace that with a lambda, right? So I'm going to create a method called demo data. I'm going to inject my movie repository, and then I'm going to create the lambda that will be used, will be run, will be executed. Actually, it's a run method, so let's say run. And now we need to create some data. This is a very data-driven session. So the quality of the data going in really seriously impacts the quality of the presentation, okay? So this is the most important part of the evening. So we're gonna create some movies. We'll create a flux of just these values, and we're gonna create some reactive-based or reactive-themed movies. The co-creator of Spring Boot, Phil Webb, came up with this little gem: the silence of the lambdas, right? Isn't that so good? And as soon as you see it, you go, oh, I wish I'd thought of that. Let's see, how about meet the fluxers, right? Anyone else? This is the audience participation part. I need feedback. There's a movie with a flux capacitor, right? Yeah, Back to the Future, right? Gosh, it's so quiet. All right. Anyone else? Yeah. Oh, come on. If Dutch people can throw out stuff like, you know, you guys can. Dutch people are a little quieter. At least that was what I was told. Actually, the crowd was awesome. They were just like, boom, take that. Here's another title. Here's another. So don't let me down. No, it was in the morning. Too early in the morning. Yeah. What? Bugs? No, that won't go in there. I'm sorry, that just won't work. I make it a point never to bug my code, so I never have to debug my code. It saves time. It saves a lot of time. And by the way, I should point out that I'm the only heckler allowed to be in the room. Okay, so no other hecklers. So there. What? Mongo bongo. Mongo bongo. Okay, yeah, we can do that. There's an Alfonso Cuarón movie called Y tu mamá también. Any Hispanohablantes in here? So you've heard Y tu mamá también. This is really cool because this is a twofer. Because you can replace mamá with mono for the mono, you know, and mono in Spanish is monkey. So you go from mother to monkey, which Killed him in Barcelona, but okay, tough crowd. Y tu mono también. Okay, también. Okay, there's an anime film, right, with Flux in the title. Anyone know? Yeah. Which is really cool because the Mac lets me do this. Boom. Top that. Take that, Linux. Okay, so if you think of any others throughout, please do stop me because it is that important. This is all based, garbage in, garbage out, good stuff in, good stuff out, right? So if you think of another one, stop me, yell it out, we'll go back and fix it. It is that important. Yes, I do. And I'll show you the repo link if you remind me at the end. You're not in the front row, but I'll leave that up to you to remind me. So, okay, so we have a flux of just these string values, right? So we're going to take those strings and we're going to map them. And I'm going to take these titles and do a new movie. So I'm going to create a new movie from these titles, and then I'm going to flat map those. So I'm going to take the movie, right? And I'm going to take my movie repository and do a save on that movie. And then, because just like streams, nothing happens until you have your terminal operation. So we're going to subscribe, and I'm just going to do system.out print line so we can see what's going on because, again, very visual person. And this works. We can clean this up a little bit because we can replace a single parameter lambdas with a method reference. So we can clean that up kind of nicely, which tightens that up a little bit. But we have a problem. We don't have a bug because, again, I don't bug my code. But we do have a problem because, oh, actually we have two problems. One thing that I do need to do, because I kind of forgot about this, I either need to start up Mongo independently or I need to add in embedded Mongo. You can go either way, but I really like to add in embedded Mongo because it's called Flapdoodle, and I just think the name's funny. So it's actually Germans, are not known for their sense of humor, and yet Flapdoodle, it's just awesome. So here we go. And so we do still have a problem because right now we're going to be restarting this application several times tonight, right? And each time we're going to be throwing these same movies into our database, which means we're probably going to get some dupes. Now this is Mongo, so we won't get a lot of dupes, but there will probably be a few dupes because at least it does save some stuff once in a while, right? So we do need to kind of make sure that we tidy up a little bit here. So what I'm going to do is do a movie repository dot delete all dot block. But this is supposed to be non-blocking, right? I mean, this is a legitimate operator, or it wouldn't be in the API. But typically, when you see block in code that you're trying to write to be non-blocking, you should probably question your life choices. At that point, you should start to wonder, is there a more idiomatic way that I can do this? That I can wait till something completes and then kick off the next thing? And of course there is. It's called then many, which takes a publisher and produces a flux, which is a specialized version of a publisher. So as luck would have it, this is exactly what we've created here, which is a flux, right? So I'm just going to bring that in and clean that up. And now we have something that should work. Each time I restart, it'll go through and delete the existing values in Mongo. Don't do this in production. This is just for a demo. And then it'll go ahead and add these values each time. So let's go ahead and start this and see if the front row is held up their end of the bargain. Okay, so look, we do have movies. That's good, right? So we have these titles. We have these IDs. So this is good. What do we do next? Because right now we've got our application that's working with our data store. It's saving things and retrieving things in a fully reactive manner. We probably should create our internal API, right? So let's do that. I'm going to create our service API. So we'll create a service called class movie service. And I'm going to inject my movie repository. Boom, boom. There we go. And what kind of an API we want? Let's start off very minimal, and we'll see where we go from there. So I'm going to want to return a flux of all movies, right? So that gets us our all. So let's see, get all movies. And we probably will want to return a particular movie, so a mono of type movie. Let's see, boom. Nope, come on. Come on. There we go. Okay. Get movie by ID, and of course we'll pass an ID to retrieve. And then we'll want to return a flux of movie events. So we can see what's happening. So we can get visualization. We can get some introspection into our system and all that's going on within it. So get events for a particular movie ID, right? Movie ID, movie ID, ID. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's flesh these out. To get all movies, we just do a return.this.movie repository, find all. Simple enough. For a get movie by ID, return this.movie repository.find by ID, passing our ID. Again, fairly straightforward pass through. This is where it gets a bit more interesting because if we had 1 million subscribers, we would probably have this subscriber data that's kind of being tracked in an in-memory grid or something similar. So we could just kind of grab that data out of the grid and present that. But we don't have 1 million subscribers yet. In fact, we don't have a subscriber yet. So that makes it a little more challenging, right? So what I'm going to do is just kind of fake it till we make it. So I'm going to do a return flux.generate, and I'm going to generate some values. I'm going to create a synchronous sync from which to spin up just an unlimited number of values. Create movie events based on the movie ID and just a date stamp, time date stamp. And right now, this will produce just a ton of movie events as fast as this little map can produce them. So that's not terribly useful for us because it's kind of overwhelming to try to keep up with as it's flies by on the screen. So I'm going to delay the elements. And I'm just going to delay it down to 1 per second. So we get just a ping. Every second it produces a new movie event. And that's our simulation. And of course, IntelliJ is barking at me saying, hey, look, looks like you're returning a publisher type object. So we need to specify, nope, we really want movie events. And this should work. If only there was some way to test this. If only there was some way to test code before you put it into production. I don't know. I was talking to Paul before the meeting, and he said that there's this really cool keystroke combination you could hit on IntelliJ. Yeah, look, it works. Okay, so this should work, right? We can try to create a test. So let's do that. I'm not really concerned about my straight pass-throughs, but I am very concerned about this, making sure it actually works. So let's create a test that tests that getEvents method. And then I'm going to run with spring runner.class, so we make sure we get our Spring capabilities baked in. This is a Spring Boot test. I'm going to auto-wire in private, let's see, our movie service, right? So I can grab that movie service and leverage our internal API even in our test. And I'm going to name my test a little more descriptively because that's actually nice, so you can see what's actually supposed to be being tested. That's a better practice, I won't say best. And I'm going to create a string called movie ID. And I'm going to use my movie service to get all movies, block first, get ID. Now, you may have noticed that block first. This is a unit test, so it's okay. I mean, this is one of the rare exceptions that blocking is fine, because that way you grab a value and move on. I should also point out that, relatively speaking, a blocking model is much, much, much easier to test for. Because you issue a request, you get a response, you test what you got back. It's relatively simple, pretty straightforward, and pretty straightforward. When you're talking about a reactive model, you may have an intermittent or a sporadic flux. So it may produce 3 values in 3 seconds. You may wait another minute for that 4th value. You may wait a week for the 5th value. How do you test that? You need some way that you can adequately test a flux that may have an indeterminate number of values over who knows how long. Well, this is where it gets really cool. Any Doctor Who fans in here? Yeah, okay. So we're going to talk about time travel tonight, because this is the second coolest part of this whole demonstration, I think. And I don't always lead with testing, but I think this is really a cool feature. So we have a movie ID. We just, the reason we block, we just tell Mongo, hey, get all the movies, but stop at the first one. So we get some random movie. We don't even care which one. Then I'm going to use the step verifier, which is in Reactor test, with virtual time. This allows us to compress time. So we don't have to worry about a flux that may produce a number of values over a very long amount of time. We can shrink that, and we can make our unit tests actually usable, so we're not sitting there for weeks waiting for them to complete. That's always a plus. So I'm going to, let's see, we'll do a movie service dot get, let's see, we'll do a get events for our movie ID, right? And I'm going to take 10. This is an example of back pressure. because what I'm simulating here is a slow subscriber. I can only take 10 values. Don't give me more. That's all I can take. And then what I can do is process those 10, and if I so chose, request another 10 or another 5 or another 50. And again, it allows your slow subscribers to not be overwhelmed, to not be crushed by the deluge of values that possibly a faster publisher could be producing. So I'm just going to take 10, and then I'm going to await a certain amount of time. Now we know, because we wrote the code, right? We know that we're going to get 10 values in 10 seconds because we're doing a delay elements of 1, duration of 1 second. So we know what we should be expecting, but out of an abundance of caution, let's make sure that we wait plenty of time so we get our 10 values. So I'm going to wait 10 hours, but we're time traveling, so it's okay. And then I'm going to expect next count. We expect 10. We're saying take 10. We should get 10. We're going to verify that. And then let's verify we're complete. Now this should work. So let's find out if it does. So we got a green bar, which is great because it means one of two things. Either your code works or your unit test doesn't. So there's one way that I find that's very helpful. I just kind of OCD about this. I like to intentionally break my unit test and then go back and try to run it again so we know for sure that we're testing what we think we're testing for and we're getting the expected results. So now I'm saying we should expect 11 values coming back, even though I've only said take 10. So it should come up red. It does. And again, because I'm a little OCD, I'm going to go ahead and put this back and rerun it one more time and make sure that we're up and running exactly as expected. So this is my way of validating my get events to make sure that my internal API, my service API is working. And of course it is, because again, I don't bug stuff. So we should be up and running, right? So I'm going to shut that down. Whoops, I don't know why you did it. There we go. And let's go back to our code. So we've created our reactive interactions with our data store. We've created our internal API for our service API. Now let's create our external API because that's the logical next step, right? So I'm going to create a REST controller and we'll do a request mapping on /movies. We'll call this, again, cleverly enough, class movie controller, and we'll inject our movie service so we can leverage that internal API externally as well. And what's our API we want to build? And I actually, whoops, let's see. I actually should point out, so for those of you who are Spring MVC developers, this will look very familiar to you, the REST controller, the request mapping. And this is nothing you're not used to seeing, right? This is where it deviates a little, but very little. Because we're going to do a get mapping, we're going to return a public of flux of movies, and we'll just say all. Now here, typically we'd return a list or an iterable of some form. We're returning a flux. Not a lot of difference. So as far as our API, I mean, everything looks very similar. So I'm going to do a get mapping here, and we're going to grab a particular movie by ID, public mono of type movie. By ID, we're going to grab a path variable for our ID. And finally, for our external API, we'll also want to, once again, grab our events for a particular movie. Public flux movie event. Let's see, events. Once again, path variable for our string ID for a particular movie. And let's go ahead and flesh this out. Return this.movieservice.get all movies. Here we'll return this.movieservice.get movie by ID, passing our ID. And here we'll return this.movieservice.get events for a particular ID. And this is almost enough. But with a REST controller, it returns what by default? Application JSON, right? We know, and that's probably fine for our flux of movies because it's a very small set of movies. So that's fine. Process it all as one document. Go on. That's great. But for our events, we know that they'll be streaming out at 1 per second for as long as we let it go on. So you can't really send that out as application JSON. It just hangs. We need to leverage something like WebSocket or server sent events for that. And of course, since this is a one-way push, server sent events makes a lot of sense. That's very easily done. We just note that it's producing a certain value, a media type, of type text event stream value. And that's enough to signal our REST controller to produce a stream of server sent events. So let's run this. And assuming no typos have crept in, we should be up and running. Okay, that looks good. Oh, let me open a window here. Okay, so can everyone see that in the back? Yes, no? Okay, good. That was your thumb, right? Okay, cool. All right, good. All right, so I'm going to use HTTPy. Is anyone an HTTPy convert? I like that better than curl. I just think it's, you know, very nice, very full-featured, and gives you a few little extras. Like if you omit the host name, it assumes localhost, which is where we are, so that saves me a little bit of time. So I'm going to hit the movies endpoint, and this is nice color-coded output, which is also nice. So that's working. That part of our API is working. I'm going to grab a particular ID, Mongo in this case. It returns that just fine. Now I'm going to see if I can retrieve the events for Mongo. And there we go. So we get a stream of a value 1 per second. So everything's working as you would expect it to. So it's working. But we can fix that, right? So right now we've done this kind of coming from a Spring MVC perspective. So what if you're not coming from a Spring MVC perspective? What if you're coming from a more functional reactive perspective? Well, we got you covered. That's kind of nice. So there are multiple ways you can define your routes. You saw one with the REST controller and the mappings, request mappings. I'm going to do another one. So I'm going to do a router function. And I'm going to, let's see, router function. So let's create our routes more functionally. So let's see, return router functions dot route. So let's create our first route. So let's see, request predicates dot get. And once again, we're going to hit our movies endpoint. And what we want to do to provide an implementation for this. Well, we could just create a new handler function. But wow, when we do that, handler function is what? It's a functional interface. And it has a single abstract method. So what can we replace that with? We can use a lambda instead, and we can clean this up quite a bit. All we really care about is a method that meets this particular signature, right? So there are many ways you can get there from here. What I like to do is separate my routes from my implementation. So I'm going to create a component here. We'll call it class movie handler, private, and I'm going to inject once again my movie service so I can leverage my internal API. Oops, boom, boom, boom. And let's go ahead and implement a few of these methods. So for starters, we know we want to retrieve all, right? We'll also want to retrieve a particular movie by its ID and then retrieve events. Now, each one of these will return a mono of type server response, which may include a flux of whatever else. So this is right, it's returning a mono, but it's a mono of server response. It returns a single response, which may include multiple items within a flux. So how will we implement this? Well, let's start off with creating a server response.ok, and we will create our body. And how will we do that? We'll use our movie service, get all movies, and return objects of type movie, right? Pretty simple. For our by ID, we'll return server response.ok.body, and we will use our movie service to get movie by ID, and then we'll take our request that came in and extract our path variable from it so we can grab the particular ID we're concerned with, and once again return objects of type movie. The events, again, has to be a little bit different because we're going to return a server response.ok.body. And for our body, once again, we'll leverage our movie service and get events. Again, using our request to extract the path variable for ID, returning objects of type movie event this time. And that's almost enough. But once again, we have to specify some way that we're returning server sent events and not application JSON, which we'll do by specifying the content type. Once again, media type dot text event stream. So that gets us our handler capabilities, our handler functions. Now we can go up and remove this ugly monstrosity. So we'll get rid of that. And actually, I need to inject my movie handler here, right? So I can leverage that. So we'll take a request. This is our Lambda, which provides a routing, right? We'll take a request, and we'll pass that to our handler, all method. And then let's add another route. So request predicates.get. Now we'll hit our movies/ID, so we can return a particular movie, right? And our Lambda for that is request handler.byId, passing our request. And then for our final endpoint, we want to also do an AND route, request predicates.get/movies/ID/events. Once again, taking our request, passing it to our handler, events. And that's not horrible, right? I mean, it's pretty readable. But once again, we can clean that up a little bit because we can take these lambdas, which take a single parameter, and replace them with a method reference. That helps quite a bit. And then we can use some static imports, which cleans that up just a bit more. And now it's pretty clean, it's pretty concise, right? So very nice and neat. So now, again, assuming we've added no typos to the mix here, let's see, let's shut this down, and we'll restart, and we'll see what we get. How are we doing on time? How long do we have before I have to shut everything off? Oh, wow, okay, so we're good, we're good. I'm gonna, around 9, okay, we're still good, okay, because I have some extra stuff I want to try out for the kind of like airing it out for the first time here. So it may go really well or it may not, but we have time, so that's good. So we're back. Everything looks like it's working, but the proof's in the pudding, right? So let me clear that. And once again, we'll hit our movies endpoint. Bam, works the same. So let me grab y tu mono también, and we'll bring that down. And then events. And let's see if we get our stream. Bam, okay, so it worked twice, 2 different ways. Isn't that cool? Now you can, I mean, there's several different ways you can slice this. So you don't even have to inject your movie handler. You can inject your movie service directly in there, create your Lambda directly in here. That's not my preference. But again, there's several ways you can get there from here, so what have you. So this is actually up and running and working. What I'd like to do now is create a web client, a reactive web client, which will consume these across the boundary, right? Across the process boundary. And then if we have time and if we're feeling terribly daring, we'll just go ahead and add security to it. Any Spring Security users in here? Spring Security up till now has used thread local, so it's a blocking approach. But with Spring Framework 5 and Project Reactor, it is not anymore, so you don't have to do that. So I'll show you how to reactively employ a security mechanism. Again, assuming time is our friend. So let's go ahead and do our reactive web client first. So I'm going to create a FluxFlix client and get rid of Mongo because we don't need that for the client. Come on. There we go. Open. Okay. And for starters, what I'm going to do is go to my application properties and reassign the port so it doesn't start up on the same port because that's port conflicts are bad. And then I'm going to go to my main application class. And again, I'm going to define my domain. So once again, class movie, private string, ID, title. We'll use Lombok once again, and args instructor, all args instructor. And then let's see, once again, class movie event, private string, movie ID, private date, viewed. Come on, there you go. Okay, and once again, Lombok and args instructor. So we have our domain. Very quick, very simple. So now, what do we do to test this? Well, let's create a bean to create a web client, right? Return web client no, actually not builder, create. And what I like to do is start off with a base URL because everything we're basing this off of will be off of this base URL anyway. Saves us a little typing down the road. Not essential, but kind of nice. So we'll start with localhost 8080/movies. Everything kind of builds from there. And then let's create a command line runner bean here so that we can go ahead and just start things off and run and see where we get it, get with things. So we'll call this demo method, and we'll inject our web client, return args, and there's our lambda to implement our run method and our command line runner. So now let's do a client.get, right? And let's retrieve something, and let's grab what we're getting back from our web client here, our API here, our endpoint, movies, and we'll convert that to a movie. And then let's filter that. So we'll take that movie, and if the movie title equals, let's see, what were some of our titles here? Let's see. Oh, Back to the Future. Okay, Back to the Future. Case insensitive, so we can just roll with it, right? Okay, so we've got a filter. So let's see, let's flat map that. So we'll take our movie, and let's do another client.get, and let's add to our URI. So let's see, /ID/events. So we can grab the events using our movie ID, get ID, right? And then we'll retrieve that. And then body to flux once again. This time it's a movie event. And then let's subscribe. Subscribe. So we can see what we have. System out, print line, boom. Okay. Front row, we good? Okay, let's run it. Oh, it's too late. The events have been set into motion, which cannot be stopped. Oh, look, it works. Okay, so good. The front row was with me all the way through this. So be very proud, you did this. Okay, so everything's running. We have a reactive web service running. We have a reactive web client consuming these values. So how can we make this better? This is so far pretty good stuff, right? And it's fairly simple. If you're coming from the Spring MVC perspective, it's not very challenging. It's pretty straightforward. If you're coming from a functional reactive perspective, there's nothing that's terribly, crazy and awe-inspiring there. It's something that you're very familiar with. Maybe a slightly different syntax, but certainly very similar in approach. So how can we make this better? Well, we can secure it for starters, right? This is where I'm going to try something new. So this should be fun. This should work fine, right? Things always work fine in demos. So what I'm going to do is create a security model. Oh, I do need to go back here and do one thing. For some reason on milestone 6, we got a slight glitch in that, so I'm going to go back to milestone 5 so I can use all the stuff that I want to. And then I'm going to bring in my security modules, which I didn't add. So let's see, dependency, Spring, security, config. Yep, that's one. And again, don't need the version number, so that's cool. Dependency, Spring, security, core. Yep, core. There we go. Look at that. And then one more. Spring, security, web, flux. Boom. Okay. Oh, come on. Web, flux. Wow. Come on, IntelliJ. You're killing me. I think even my my IDE is just having a moment. There we go. Okay, so once I got that to cooperate, this should be fairly straightforward. So let's go back over here and do enable webflux security, and we'll create a configuration class security config. Let's see. So we need to create a couple of beans because when you're talking security, there are two key bits, right? The authentication, which says you are who you say you are. And the other is the authorization. You can do this, or you can't do that under any circumstances, which is usually where I fall, right? Because I'm not a very secure person, so they typically gate what I can get a hold of. But for tonight, it's all my machine, so yeah, it's fair game. So the first thing I'm going to do is, let's see, what I need to do. I need to create a user details repository for our authentication. Let's see, so return, and I'm going to create a map user details repository. Very simple, just for the demo. Actually, new user details repository, and I'm going to create a couple users with username P Weber. Okay, and we'll give you a password. Oops, a password. Very strong password. PW, right? We'll give you the roles of user. Actually, you know what? Paul seems fairly trustworthy, right? So we'll make him the admin. And then let's build this. And then I'm going to create another account for me, with username, and Heckler. And because I can't be trusted under any circumstances, I'm going to give myself a password of PW. But I'm also going to just assign myself the role of user. So even I don't trust me. So that is our user details repository. A very basic one, but it's something we can work with, right? And that's enough for authentication. But now if we want authorization, we want to add in, let's see, our security web filter chain. So we can create a web filter chain which will screen out what is exposed, what answers when the knock comes on the door. So this will be for, let's see, authorization. Say that 3 times fast. And I'm going to bring in HTTP security. Actually, I'm going to shorten that quite nicely. And return HTTP dot, let's see, let's authorize exchange. And we'll allow any exchange that has role admin, right? And let's see, we'll require HTTP basic, and let's build this. And that should be enough to get a very basic security model, fully reactive security model in place. So let's go ahead and stop this and restart. Let's see what we have. Looks like it works, but again, there's only one way to really find out. So I'm going to go back and just hit the movies endpoint, and okay, so we see it's unauthorized, which is what we were hoping would happen, right? I mean, this shouldn't just spew its data out for anybody. So we need to somehow provide some kind of a login information. So I'm going to say auth, and I'm going to use mheckler. Let's see what I use, PW, right? I'm going to test that, except remember, it's only admins. Only admins can get to this, and I don't even trust me. So it's telling me that my access is forbidden. So I'm out. But I'll bet if we try to log in as Paul, this will work. If not, we're done already, and it's an early evening. Oh, it does work. Okay, so that's good. So that's as we expected it to. So let's go ahead and exercise our API. Let's make sure that everything works. So let's hit a particular movie. So we see once again 200 okay. Let's grab our events. Oh yeah, look at that. Okay, so that all works. So our FluxFlix service is fully reactively secured. So that's good. Let's go back and see how we would secure our web client so we can provide that information and authorize and authenticate. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can, in many cases, you can tweak what comes back, but there are certain things that are expected, and in that case, you would typically see a forbidden if you didn't have the access privileges. So in that case, it pretty much lines up. But yeah, I mean, you can provide the error codes that will return. Yeah, but if you do that, realize that you probably want to stay fairly consistent with the expectations, principle of least surprise, and all that. So I would encourage you to use what's there and tweak only when necessary. Makes sense, right? Okay, so the client, we have to do things a little bit differently now, because if I try to run the client, this should fail, right? And of course it does, because that's what it should do, right? So how do we get around this? How do we make sure that we can authenticate properly and get the authorization we need so we can provide the data that we need? So I'm going to change my web client a little bit, how it's created. So I'm going to do a web client dot builder dot, and I'm going to create a filter. This takes an exchange filter functions. I'm going to provide a basic authentication, and I'm going to specify Paul's information in there, because Paul has the power, right? And then let's see. Actually, I think I just need to do a build. No, I need to provide the base URL. Let me clean this up just a little bit. dot filter dot base URL. Once again, we're hitting the same place, http://localhost 8080/movies dot build. Okay, so what we've done is provide the basic authentication, Paul's credentials. So we have the power, hopefully, for our web client to authenticate, to be validated, to authorize, to hit the various endpoints that we're going to hit, in this case, the movies endpoint and the events endpoint, and turn around and stream back what we expect. So again, assuming no typos. Oh, we have a typo. Look at that. Oh, let's see. Yeah, well, that helps. Okay, front row. Come on. My bad. My bad. Okay. And we're in business. It's really that simple. I mean, granted, this is a pretty simple example, but it doesn't get a lot more complex when you're wiring in like OAuth and OpenID and things like that. Yes, sir. That's the base URL that I'm using to reference my backing service. My FluxFlix service is at this URL right here. So I need to, or I can provide that as my base URL for my web client. And then I'm building off of that down here. I just add on to the URL here for the, Yep, because the FluxFlix service is running on port 88. Yep, and OpenID, OAuth 2, yep. Yeah, Spring Security, if you haven't used it, it's used by a lot of folks, and it includes a lot of capabilities. The thing that was kind of, I won't say missing, because really the whole Reactive story has just come together now, but that was the big thing that they added for Spring Framework 5 and the current version of Spring Security that's rolling out with it, or has rolled out with it, I should say, because it's out. Spring Framework 5 was released 1 week after Java 9, full Java 9 compatibility, but obviously baselined at Java 8, so Java 8 up. But yeah, Spring Security, fully non-blocking security model now as well. Kind of nice. And before I forget, because this is the part that I usually just kind of like stop. So let's see. Let me go back to here. And does anybody recognize him, by the way? Moss? Oh, thank goodness. Okay, yeah. It always worries me a little when I ask that and people kind of give me the blank stare. If you haven't watched the IT Crowd, I'm not sure. Is it still on Netflix? It is. Okay, watch that. It was a British sitcom from 5-7 years ago. And they ran for a couple of years, and then it was canceled. And the whole crew came back like a year or two later to do a kind of wrap up and ending, which was neat because every one of them came back, bar none. And it was really a nice send off. But this is Moss. He's one of the quirkier characters and one of my favorites. So anyway, so here's some helpful resources. The first one is the Reactive Streams specification page. That's where you get information on the Reactive Streams spec, the API, the TCK, what have you. The next one is Project Reactor's homepage, and that is the jumping off point for the GitHub repo, for the API docs, for how-tos, everything. The next one is everything you saw tonight. Well, okay, the security stuff I don't have in there actually on the intro, but I do have these versions, the Java versions, as well as fully idiomatic Kotlin versions of the FluxFlix service and FluxFlix client out under the FluxFlix intro in my repo. And then Josh and I have a much more expanded example under the FluxFlix service, including the security, including Actuator. Rob Winch, head of Spring Security, actually did a lot of extra coding in there as well to kind of show off some of the capabilities. So there's a lot there. Please, please, please go out, star it, download it, play with it, fork it if you wish, and have fun. And that's pretty much it. So yeah. We covered just kind of a summary. We started with our reactive database interactions. So everything was reactive database access, retrieval, storage, it's all reactive, no blocking whatsoever. And then we went up to defining our internal API. We defined an external API that wrapped that so that we can expose that across our process boundary. We rewrote the routes, well actually wrote, I should say, in Spring MVC style, as well as a functional style. So we rewrote it a couple times there, or wrote it a couple times. Then we focused on the client and did a fully reactive web client. Then we went back and secured it end to end. So it's been a big evening, covered a lot of ground, but noodle on it. If you have any questions, feedback, comments, whatever, I'm here for a little longer this evening, and then ping me anywhere on Twitter, preferably, but if not, email. And happy to talk about this at length. So thanks for hosting me. Thanks for inviting me to sunny San Diego. And thanks.
More questions.
Yes. Okay. Well, I mean, obviously it's a different model, but typically you don't, at least to some degree, you're not talking, you should be, in many cases, considering stateless services anyway. So whether you're blocking or not, I know what you're probably referring to in terms of maintaining that connection, so you have a certain consistency there. There is a little bit of overhead because you're not maintaining that, but ultimately what it comes down to, I think, is using it in cases where it makes sense. In cases where you have to maintain that state per thread, per request, in a blocking model, you stay with that blocking model. If it's not giving you any heartburn, there's no reason to directly move off of that in all cases. So there will be cases that are going to be more problematic in a reactive model, and there are going to be cases that are unsolvable unless you, well, I shouldn't say unsolvable, certainly better solved with a reactive approach as well. So if there's something that you need to maintain that state, well, and okay, let me, I don't want to take this too far down this path, but you do control the scheduler, so you do control the number of threads and how you leverage the threads in your publishers. That said, you really shouldn't, in most cases, you really shouldn't start manually managing those threads, because then you create more work, more burdens, more headaches that is kind of the whole reactive model is meant to avoid in the first place. But there's so much in that question that I'm not even sure which thread to start pulling, no pun intended, which thread to start pulling at. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because I keep thinking that, I mean, ultimately what you have now is something that's not recoverable in the case of a failure, or at least easily recoverable, because you're expecting that state to be there. So when something fails, you're going to have to recreate. Whereas if you're a fully stateless model and you're passing that each time, then it doesn't matter if something fails, if you're rerouted, it doesn't really matter at all. You're providing the context with each request.
Maybe
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that would actually, that's kind of a recommendation regardless of whether you're talking about an imperative or a reactive model, in terms of a kind of, I always hate the term best practice, but certainly a recommended practice. You had a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about debugging.
Ah, yes. Okay.
A little bit. The stack trace that we see.
Yes.
Debugging
Yes. With every approach, you have gains and you have losses, and the debugging is big in the loss column in general in terms of ease of following that trace. Because when you have an imperative, a blocking model, and you have something fail, you have a very clean, well, you have a much more readable stack trace. It's very traceable. Man, the puns are just killing me tonight, and I'm giving them. So it's really scary. But with a reactive approach, you don't have a clean stack trace. If you go to the project-reactor.io docs, there's actually a capability you can flip on to gather some data and provide more meaningful, I don't want to say pointers because that's a bit of a loaded term as well, but it's certainly a better indication of where the problem lay. It's more expository in terms of providing you the context. So you go, oh, here's my problem. There was a null value here, or there was a problem at this stage which caused a failure downstream. So it gives you that context you need in order to solve the issue, to resolve the issue. It's built in within Project Reactor, but it's something that you have to enable. So it gives you the capability to do that introspection and find things more readily. But make no mistake, even with that, it's not going to be as clean as a stack trace. We can literally just go down the trace. So it does increase your complexity, but it also increases your scalability. So, and that's another reason why not just to go, hey, guess what? Reactive's a hot buzzword. We're going to apply it to everything. We're going to sprinkle reactive dust on everything. It's going to make life better. It's going to make life better in some circumstances and worse in others. You have to apply it judiciously where you need to use it. So. Okay. Oh, yes.
So is there like a general idea of what you would not want to use reactive for? Or like certain projects that you just say don't even bother with that?
Well, if you're not having any latency problems or resource problems, if you're not seeing a scalability issue like a vast number of requests that you're needing to come in and service, I don't know that I would worry about it. But when you are having to address that, or having the potential, the very real potential to have to address that and to be able to scale up sometimes very dramatically, very quickly, that would be a great candidate for a reactive model.
So you're not expecting much growth?
If you have a stable load, you're not having issues with blocking and not, and waiting and not getting the responses in a timely manner, yeah, I mean, keep doing what you're doing. But it gives you another option for those cases where you are, where you can't scale enough, where you're exhausting your thread pool, so that's a very viable option. But it's not free. You add some complexity into it. That's certainly some mental complexity as trying to reason through and debug and keep track of what's happening where and all that. But well worth it, I think, in the cases where you need it. So. Okay. Well, again, any questions? Ping me. So, thanks.